Last week, President Donald Trump said that the US would resume testing its nuclear weapons, potentially signalling the upending of decades of American policy. This comes against a backdrop of increasing nuclear posturing by the world's nuclear powers, as they seek to modernise or increase their stockpiles and weapons systems. So, in this video, we're going to explain Trump's slightly ambiguous nuclear weapons announcement, and why it looks like the world has entered a new nuclear age. Before we start, do you have any criticisms of the work that we do here at TLDR? Well, every year we make a video where the whole team sits down and responds to the biggest issues you, the audience, have with our work. We're working on this year's iteration of that video right now. So if you do have any complaints with TLDR, click the link in the description to submit them and we'll respond to them in a video very soon. We're going to start by taking a look at the current distribution of nuclear weapons around the world, to provide some context. 9 countries possess nuclear weapons. In descending order of size of their arsenals, they are Russia, the US, China, France, the UK, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. You can see on screen that the vast majority of the world's nuclear warheads are in the Russian and American arsenals, with more than 5,000 each according to the Arms Control Association, while China is in a distant third place with around 600. Now, in his announcement, Trump said, quote, "Because of other countries' testing programs, I've instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis." Trump's ambiguity left open a few different possibilities. The most dramatic being that the US would begin carrying out test nuclear explosions. For context, the US hasn't carried out any nuclear explosion since 1992, and only North Korea has carried out explosive nuclear tests in the 21st century, most recently in 2017. So, if what Trump is talking about is a return to explosive nuclear tests, it would be a dramatic upending of decades of US policy, and throw the international nuclear test regime into doubt by significantly undermining any existing American credibility on non-proliferation, and likely provoking some kind of reciprocal response by other nuclear-armed states like Russia and China. But Trump's Energy Secretary Chris Wright, whose agency is responsible for testing, has sought to provide some clarity, saying that, "I think the tests we're talking about right now are system tests. These are not nuclear explosions." System tests would be most consistent with Trump's mention of equal basis testing, as in just the past few days, Russia announced that it had successfully tested its Burevestnik long-range nuclear-powered cruise missile, capable of delivering a nuclear warhead, and also its new Poseidon nuclear-powered nuclear-capable underwater drone. But that is far from the only nuclear saber-rattling and posturing that's taken place recently. In August, after a spat with former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, Trump said he had ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, presumably closer to Russia. That same month, Russia said it would no longer abide by the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, a Cold War-era bilateral arms control treaty that the US pulled out of during Trump's first term. Just last month, Russia, the US, and NATO each carried out their regular nuclear exercises. Not an unusual occurrence, but what was notable was that for the first time ever, NATO invited journalists to witness parts of the once-secret event, likely part of an effort to not just reassure its own domestic audience, but also to send a message to adversaries. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the Kremlin has engaged in semi-regular nuclear saber-rattling, including approving a new nuclear doctrine in November 2024 that officially brought Belarus under the nuclear umbrella, and said the use of nuclear weapons would be justified in response to a large attack with conventional non-nuclear weapons. These US-Russia nuclear-related tensions have left the future of their last remaining bilateral arms control treaty, New START, in doubt, as unless it's extended, it will expire in February 2026. Even if all this US-Russia nuclear saber-rattling is less a direct military threat and more a diplomatic tool, it's still ominous and risks undermining the nuclear taboo. And it's not even just the US and Russia. Nuclear powers the world over are seeking to modernise their nuclear arsenals and demonstrate their capabilities, potentially signalling what Finnish President Alexander Stubb recently called a new nuclear age. In September, during its Victory Day parade, China, which has the world's fastest growing nuclear stockpile, displayed all 3 legs of its nuclear triad for the first time ever. The US military estimates that China's 600 warhead arsenal will grow to more than 1,000 warheads by 2030. Also, in September, North Korea published photos of one of its uranium enrichment facilities for the first time, with its leader Kim Jong-un having previously vowed to exponentially increase the size of his nuclear arsenal. Kim's regime said this year it would never give up its nuclear weapons, seeing them as a guarantor of its survival, a position likely emboldened by the American and Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities in June. Against the backdrop of North Korea's opposition to denuclearization, polls suggest a majority of South Koreans would favour having a domestic nuclear weapons program, although there are no plans to do so. Elsewhere in Asia, India and Pakistan, whose tensions briefly erupted into armed, but fortunately non-nuclear conflict this year, are both thought to be expanding their nuclear capabilities. The United Kingdom is also expected to grow its stockpile in the future, as the then Conservative government in 2021 reversed plans to reduce its stockpile to 180, and instead increase the cap on warhead numbers to 260. Meanwhile, France's President Macron has floated extending the French nuclear umbrella to European allies, something that the Polish government has expressed interest in. Unsurprisingly, Ukraine's President Zelensky has several times suggested that if Ukraine, which gave up its nuclear weapons after the Soviet Union's collapse in the 90s, cannot be in NATO, then it should be given nuclear weapons as a means to deter Russian aggression. If you look at the numbers on paper, the global nuclear warhead stockpile is still falling, but at a much slower rate than in the first decades after the Cold War. And today's reductions are happening only because the US and Russia are still dismantling previously retired warheads. Those aside, the number of warheads is actually on the rise once again. It's a far cry from the early 21st century, when nuclear weapons seemed like a bit of a Cold War relic, and the era of great power competition had largely given way to conflicts defined by counter-terrorism and counterinsurgency. It was against this backdrop that, in 2009, then-President Obama laid out his vision of, quote, the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. Things feel very different a decade and a half later, as the growing stockpiles and nuclear posturing of major powers have elevated nuclear weapons in the public consciousness once again, with films like Oppenheimer and House of Dynamite, and the fact that the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to a Japanese group that has long advocated for the abolition of nuclear arms, serving as cultural evidence markers of this new nuclear age. 80 years after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and more than 30 years since the end of the Cold War, the spectre of nuclear weapons clearly continues to hang over us. If you're interested in major news events like this, you'll have certainly been paying attention to what's happening in the Middle East recently, with the whole region seemingly in a state of flux. The next issue of our magazine Too Long is all about that, with our headline section titled The New Middle East. In it, we run through each country in the region and discuss their future, before reflecting on how recent events have reshaped the Middle East forever. We obviously talk about the Middle East a lot in videos, but this is our most zoomed out, detailed and thought through coverage yet, truly outlining how we see this region re-emerging. It's not just that though, there's also been a whole lot of major elections this year. So in this issue we have a whole section talking about all of the major elections that have taken place this year, and how global politics has changed. There's also articles on everything from China's continued dominance, politics in the UK, and how politicians have hijacked social media. This latest issue is now available to pre-order on our website, and as always, subscribing will get you 20% off not only this copy, but also every future copy as long as you're subscribed. Plus, just this time round, we're offering bundles with our book Assembly Required and our 2026 calendar. For instance, you can subscribe to Too Long and get a copy of the book for just £43.99, or add a calendar for only a few pounds more. Anyway, click the link in the description for all of the offers, and thank you for supporting the channel.